In 1952, the United States Air Force sent out an order to all airplane pilots. They had to report any strange lights in the sky right away to the nearest military base. The order came just months after weird lights had been seen across the Midwest. Most of these reports were brushed off as weather balloons or test planes, but buried in the official files, one case was different. It had lights that didn't just stay in the sky. They came down. They moved through wheat fields. And they seemed to know when people were watching. The people who saw them weren't city folks with wild ideas. They were Kansas farmers. People who knew their land better than anyone. People who could tell the difference between a far-off airplane and something else entirely. Kansas in the early 1950s was doing great with farming. The state had bounced back from the Great Depression with new hope. Huge wheat fields went on forever in every direction. Small farming towns dotted the land like islands in an ocean of grain. These were close communities where everyone knew their neighbors, where news traveled fast and secrets were hard to keep. The dirt in central Kansas is some of the best in North America. Hundreds of years of prairie grass had made a layer of soil perfect for growing wheat. The weather was just right too. Hot summers and cold winters made perfect conditions for winter wheat. This could be planted in fall and picked in early summer. By 1952, Kansas was growing almost 20% of all wheat in the United States. This farming boom had brought new machines to the plains. Farmers were using bigger tractors and better equipment than ever before. Many had put electric lights in their barns and farmyards. Some even had two-way radios to talk across their big properties. These were practical people who knew machines well. They weren't easily fooled by tricks of light. The first written report happened on the 14th of October, 1952, near the town of Russell. Robert Patterson was checking his cattle in the early evening. He noticed what he first thought was a car driving through his wheat field. The light was moving too slow to be an airplane. It was moving too smooth to be a tractor. Patterson grabbed his field glasses and looked closer at the light. What he saw made no sense. A ball of white light, about the size of a pickup truck, was floating about 3 feet above his wheat. The ball moved in a straight line across the field. It stopped now and then as if it was looking at the crop. Patterson guessed it was moving at about 15 miles per hour. As he watched, the light began to pulse. It got brighter and dimmer in a steady beat. Patterson had served in the Pacific during World War II. He had seen flares, searchlights, and tracer bullets. This was unlike anything he had ever seen. The light cast no shadows on the ground below it. The wheat stalks didn't bend or move as the ball passed over them. Most scary of all, the light seemed to know he was there. When Patterson stepped forward to see better, the ball stopped moving. It stayed still for nearly 5 minutes. Then it slowly drifted away toward the horizon. Patterson told the Russell County Sheriff's Office about it the next morning. Deputy Sheriff James Miller wrote down the details but didn't believe it. Patterson was known as a trustworthy man, but the story seemed too strange. Miller filed the report and forgot about it. That changed 3 days later when Miller got a second call about mystery lights. This time the person was Margaret Foster. She was a school teacher who lived on a farm 6 miles southeast of Russell. Foster was driving home from a parent-teacher meeting when she noticed lights moving across the fields beside the road. She pulled over to get a better look. She counted at least 7 separate balls of light. Each was about the size of a car tire. The lights were spread out but moving together. They traveled alongside the county road. Foster said they had a yellowish-orange glow, like heated metal. They moved without any sound across the land. Sometimes they split apart. Then they came back together in their first pattern. The whole show lasted about 10 minutes. Then the lights disappeared behind a line of trees. Foster's sighting was different from Patterson's in several ways. Patterson had seen one white ball. Foster saw many orange lights. Patterson's ball had moved slow and steady. Foster's lights seemed to dance and play, almost like they were alive. The only thing that was the same was that both people said the lights made no sound at all. Word of the sightings spread fast through Russell County. At the local diner, farmers began sharing their own strange stories. Henry Kowalski mentioned seeing odd lights over his cornfield the week before. He had thought they were from aircraft doing night training. Alice Thompson remembered her dogs barking like crazy one evening when a bright light passed over her property. Other people reported power outages, radio problems, and animals acting strange. By November 1952, sightings were being reported all across central Kansas. The cities of Salina, Hutchinson, and Great Bend all had multiple reports. Local newspapers began covering the story. Most treated it as something curious rather than serious news. The Kansas City Star ran a small story with the headline, "Mystery Lights Puzzle Farmers." The Wichita Eagle dismissed the reports as seasonal weather problems. The most detailed story came from three brothers who farmed together near the town of Lorain. The Brennan brothers were Michael, Patrick, and Daniel. They were working late to bring in their wheat harvest before a storm hit. It was the 8th of November, 1952. They were racing against time to save their crop. The brothers had been working since dawn. They were running 2 combines and a grain truck. By 11 o'clock that evening, they were tired but determined to finish the last section of wheat. The sky was cloudy with flashes of lightning in the distance. The air smelled of rain and coming weather. Michael Brennan was running the lead combine when he first saw the light. It looked like a faint glow on the horizon. It was similar to the lights of a distant town. But as he kept harvesting, the glow got brighter. It began moving toward them. Michael radioed his brothers on their walkie-talkies to tell them about the coming light. Patrick Brennan was driving the grain truck. He saw it next. He later said it looked like a giant Christmas ornament hanging in the air. The ball was perfectly round. It glowed with a bright white light that hurt to look at directly. Unlike electric lights, this glow seemed to come from inside the ball itself. It was as if the whole object was made of glowing material. The ball came toward them slowly. It stayed about 50 feet above the ground. As it got closer, the brothers noticed their radio equipment began making static noise. The engines on their combines started running rough. The headlights on their vehicles got much dimmer. Daniel, who was running the second combine, said his engine almost died completely. When the ball was right overhead, all 3 men felt a strange, tingling feeling. It was as if the air itself had become electric. The hair on their arms stood up. They could taste something metallic in their mouths. The wheat field around them seemed to glow with a faint light. Even more disturbing, the wheat stalks right under the ball began swaying in complex patterns. There was no wind at all. Michael Brennan decided to walk closer to the object. He shut down his combine and walked to within about 20 yards of where the ball hovered. As he got closer, he could see that the ball was not solid. It seemed to be made of swirling energy or plasma. Colors shifted within the glow, mostly white but with hints of blue and yellow. The ball began coming down slowly toward the ground. Michael guessed it was about 12 feet across. As it touched down in the wheat field, the grain stalks right under it burst into blue flames. The flames lasted only a few seconds before going out. The fire left a perfect round burn mark in the field. It was about 15 feet across. For nearly 20 minutes, the ball stayed on the ground. During this time, the Brennan brothers saw smaller lights coming out of the main ball. These smaller balls were about the size of basketballs. They drifted around the wheat field in what seemed like random patterns. Some hovered over the grain truck, others moved in circles around the combines. One came within 10 feet of where Michael stood before going back to the main object. The most unsettling part of the encounter was the complete silence. Despite its size and obvious energy, the large ball made no sound at all. Even when the smaller lights came out and began moving around the field, there was no noise except the distant rumble of thunder from the coming storm. Patrick Brennan tried to start his grain truck during the incident. The engine turned over but would not start. The electrical systems in all 3 vehicles seemed to be completely dead. Even their battery-powered walkie-talkies made nothing but static. It was as if the presence of the balls had temporarily shut down all electronic equipment in the area. The encounter ended as suddenly as it had begun. The smaller balls returned to the main ball. The main ball then began rising slowly into the sky. As it climbed, normal electrical function returned to their vehicles. The engines started right away. The radio static cleared. Within minutes, the ball had disappeared into the cloudy night sky. Only the burn mark in the wheat field was left as proof of what had happened. The next morning, the Brennan brothers looked at the burn mark closely. The circle was perfectly round and exactly 15 feet across. Inside the circle, every wheat stalk had been turned to ash. The soil underneath showed signs of having been hit by intense heat. There was a glassy coating visible on the surface. Strangest of all, the burn mark showed no signs of fire having spread beyond its edges. The wheat stalks right outside the circle were completely untouched. Local authorities were called to look at the site. Sheriff Clayton Weber took photos of the burn mark and collected soil samples. Kansas State University sent a farming specialist to investigate. They wanted to see if the damage could have been caused by disease or chemical contamination. No normal explanation could be found for the perfect circular pattern or the glassy coating in the soil. Word of the Brennan brothers' encounter spread beyond Russell County. Reporters from Kansas City and Wichita came to interview the family and look at the burn mark. The story was picked up by wire services and appeared in newspapers across the country. For a short time, the small farming community of Lorain found itself at the center of national attention. Not everyone welcomed the publicity. Many local residents were worried that the media attention would bring unwanted visitors. They were concerned it would interfere with the farming operations that were the backbone of their economy. Others worried that reports of mystery lights would hurt property values. They thought it might make it hard to attract new residents to the area. The timing of the sightings was particularly sensitive. The Korean War was ongoing. Cold War tensions were at their peak. Any reports of unidentified aerial things raised concerns about possible enemy spying or experimental weapons testing. The fact that the sightings were happening in Kansas made them even more puzzling. Kansas was far from any military bases or major population centers. Military officials from nearby Fort Riley visited the Brennan farm to investigate the burn mark and interview the witnesses. The officers were professional and thorough but revealed nothing about their conclusions. Shortly after their visit, local residents noticed an increase in aircraft activity over the area. Military planes were seen conducting what appeared to be surveillance flights over the farmland where the balls had been reported. More sightings continued throughout the winter of 1952 and into early 1953. Most followed a similar pattern to the earlier reports. Witnesses described round lights moving silently across farmland. This usually happened at night or during evening hours. The balls ranged in size from a few feet to nearly 20 feet across. Colors varied from white to orange to yellow. Some witnesses reported blue or green tints. One major incident happened on the 15th of January, 1953, near the town of Ellsworth. Farmer William Rodriguez was checking on his livestock during a severe winter storm. He saw 3 large balls moving in formation across his pasture. Unlike previous sightings, these lights appeared during heavy snowfall. They seemed unaffected by the weather conditions. Rodriguez noticed that the snow directly under the balls was melting. This created 3 moving circles of bare ground in his pasture. The melting snow created steam clouds that rose several feet into the air before disappearing. When the balls passed over a small pond on his property, the ice covering the water began to crack and melt. Steam rose from the surface as if the water was being heated from above. The Rodriguez sighting was particularly important because it provided the first clear evidence that the balls generated substantial heat. Previous witnesses had noticed electrical effects and the strange burn mark at the Brennan farm. But this was the first time anyone had observed the objects melting snow and ice. This physical evidence helped convince doubters that the witnesses were observing real events rather than optical illusions or weather problems. Dr. Eleanor Hartman was a physicist from the University of Kansas. She became interested in the reports after reading about the Rodriguez incident. Hartman had studied plasma physics. She was curious about the possibility that the balls might be some form of naturally occurring plasma formation. She traveled to Russell County to interview witnesses and examine the physical evidence. Hartman's investigation uncovered several puzzling details that hadn't been widely reported. Multiple witnesses described the balls as having internal structure. They could see swirling patterns within the glow. Some reported seeing what appeared to be solid objects at the center of the spheres. Others described the lights as pulsing in regular rhythms. This suggested some form of controlled energy output. Perhaps most intriguingly, Hartman discovered that the ball sightings showed clear patterns in terms of timing and location. Most occurred between sunset and midnight. Peak activity was around 9 o'clock in the evening. Geographically, the sightings clustered around areas of the county with specific soil compositions and underground water sources. Fields with high iron content in the soil seemed particularly attractive to the events. Hartman theorized that the balls might be related to piezoelectric effects in the crystalline structures found in Kansas soil. Under certain weather conditions, pressure and electric fields could potentially create charged plasma formations. However, her theory couldn't explain the size, duration, or apparently controlled movement of the objects that witnesses described. The sightings began to decline in frequency during the spring of 1953. By summer, reports had dropped to only occasional incidents. The last major sighting occurred on the 23rd of August, 1953. Schoolteacher Dorothy Matthews observed a single large ball moving slowly across a wheat field near Russell. Matthews provided one of the most detailed descriptions ever recorded. She noted that the object appeared to be surveying the grain crop. It moved in systematic patterns as if conducting some form of agricultural inspection. Matthews was an experienced amateur astronomer. She had access to a powerful telescope. Through her telescope, she observed that the ball had a complex internal structure. It had multiple layers or shells rotating at different speeds. She sketched what she saw. She noted that the object seemed to be collecting something from the wheat field. She couldn't determine what that might be. After the Matthews sighting, reports of the balls virtually ceased. Occasional claims surfaced over the following decades, but nothing matched the intensity or frequency of the 1952 to 1953 wave. The physical evidence gradually disappeared as well. The burn mark at the Brennan farm was eventually plowed under during normal farming operations. Other evidence sites were forgotten or built over as the county developed. Official explanations for the ball sightings varied depending on the source. Military investigators suggested the lights might have been caused by weather testing of experimental aircraft or weapons systems. Weather services proposed that unusual weather conditions could have created ball lightning or other electrical events. Agricultural experts theorized that methane gas from decomposing organic matter might have ignited spontaneously, creating the observed lights. None of these explanations adequately addressed all aspects of the witnessed events. Ball lightning typically lasts only seconds, not the 20-minute encounters reported by witnesses. Methane fires would have been accompanied by sound and wouldn't explain the systematic movement patterns observed. Experimental aircraft wouldn't account for the complete silence or the ability to hover motionless for extended periods. Local residents developed their own theories over time. Some believed the balls were visitors from other worlds conducting agricultural research. Others thought they might be time travelers from the future studying 20th century farming methods. A few proposed that the lights were some form of natural earth energy that occasionally showed up under specific conditions. The most persistent theory among farmers was that the balls were somehow connected to the health and productivity of their crops. Several witnesses noted that fields visited by the lights often produced exceptional harvests the following season. Soil tests conducted years later showed elevated mineral content in areas where balls had been observed. The connection remained purely guesswork. Scientific interest in the Kansas ball sightings faded as the reports declined. Dr. Hartman published a paper on her findings in an obscure physics journal. It attracted little attention from the broader scientific community. The incident was gradually forgotten, except by local residents and a few dedicated researchers of unexplained events. Today, the farmland where the balls appeared looks much the same as it did in 1952. Wheat fields stretch to the horizon. They are broken only by farmhouses, grain silos, and country roads. New technology has transformed farming practices, but the basic landscape remains unchanged. Occasionally, older residents will point out locations where the lights were seen. Few of the original witnesses are still alive. The Russell County Historical Society maintains a small file on the ball sightings. It includes photographs of the burn mark and transcripts of witness interviews. Researchers occasionally visit to examine the materials, but no new insights have emerged. The case remains as mysterious today as it was 70 years ago. Recent advances in weather science and plasma physics have provided new tools for investigating similar events, but no one has attempted to apply these methods to the Kansas sightings. The witnesses are gone. The physical evidence has been destroyed by time and agriculture. The scientific community has moved on to other mysteries. Yet, questions remain. What were the glowing balls that so many reliable witnesses observed moving across the Kansas wheat fields? Why did they appear when and where they did? What was their apparent interest in agricultural land? Why did they demonstrate seemingly intelligent behavior? They responded to human presence and moved in systematic patterns. Perhaps most intriguingly, could similar events be occurring today in remote agricultural areas where few people would observe them? Modern farming relies heavily on automated equipment and GPS guidance systems. Farmers spend less time in their fields after dark than they did in 1952. Would contemporary ball activity go unnoticed in our technology-dependent age? The Kansas ball sightings remind us that even in our modern, well-observed world, mysteries persist. Sometimes the most extraordinary events occur in the most ordinary places. They are witnessed by the most practical people. In the wheat fields of Kansas, something unusual happened that challenged our understanding of physics, agriculture, and the nature of reality itself. What answers might those glowing spheres have revealed if we had possessed the technology to study them properly? What secrets of energy, propulsion, or consciousness might they have shared? We may never know, but their brief appearance in the Kansas countryside stands as a testament to the enduring mystery of our world and the limitations of human knowledge. Additional incidents continued to surface in the following years. In March 1954, farmer Thomas Anderson reported seeing what he described as a parade of lights moving across his property near Hayes. Anderson counted 12 separate orbs moving in single-file formation. Each was approximately 6 feet in diameter and glowed with a soft blue light. The procession lasted nearly 30 minutes, as the orbs moved systematically across his wheat fields. What made Anderson's sighting unique was his observation that the orbs seemed to be interacting with his livestock. His cattle, normally scattered across the pasture, had gathered in a tight group. They were following the lights as they moved. The animals showed no signs of fear or distress. Instead, they appeared almost hypnotized by the sight. After the lights disappeared, the cattle returned to their normal grazing patterns. Anderson's wife, Mary, witnessed the entire event from their farmhouse kitchen window. She noted that their household electricity flickered repeatedly during the passage of the orbs. The family's radio produced strange humming sounds that seemed to match the rhythm of the moving lights. Even their wind-up alarm clock began running slow during the encounter. It lost nearly 15 minutes before returning to normal operation. The Anderson sighting was investigated by a team from Kansas State University's physics department. Professor James Mitchell led the investigation and spent 3 days interviewing witnesses and examining the property. Mitchell found unusual electric readings in the soil where the orbs had passed. The readings were unlike anything he had encountered in his 20 years of weather research. Mitchell's team also discovered that several trees on the Anderson property showed signs of accelerated growth in the weeks following the orb encounter. Ring samples taken from these trees revealed growth spurts that shouldn't have occurred during the dormant winter season. The event suggested that the orbs somehow stimulated biological processes in plants they encountered. In May 1954, the town of Lindsborg experienced what became known as the Swedish Festival Lights. During the annual Svensk Hyllningsfest celebration, hundreds of visitors reported seeing a massive orb hovering over the town's main street. The sphere was estimated to be over 30 feet in diameter and glowed with a warm golden light. Festival organizers initially thought someone had deployed a weather balloon with lights attached as part of the celebration. However, no one claimed responsibility for the display. Local pilots confirmed that no aircraft were scheduled to fly over the area during the festival. The orb remained stationary for over an hour before slowly ascending and disappearing into the night sky. Swedish immigrant families in Lindsborg had their own interpretation of the event. Several elderly residents claimed the orb resembled descriptions of the Lysgloben, or light globes, from Scandinavian folklore. These mythical events were said to appear during times of community celebration or significant cultural events. Whether the Lindsborg orb was connected to local folklore or represented the same event observed by farmers remained unclear. The festival sighting was significant because it occurred over a populated area with hundreds of witnesses. Unlike the isolated farm encounters, this event was observed by people from various backgrounds and locations. The consistency of witness accounts lent additional credibility to the growing body of orb sightings across central Kansas. Dr. Hartman expanded her research to include the festival incident and other urban sightings. She began to suspect that the orbs were not random events, but were somehow attracted to human activity and agricultural practices. Her analysis suggested that areas with higher population density and more intensive farming showed increased orb activity. Hartman's expanded study revealed another intriguing pattern. Orb sightings seemed to correlate with specific weather conditions. This particularly included the presence of temperature inversions and electric disturbances in the air. She theorized that these conditions might create natural channels that allowed the events to manifest more easily. The final major wave of sightings occurred during the summer of 1954. Over a 6-week period from July to August, reports flooded in from across central Kansas. The sightings were more frequent and more intense than anything previously recorded. Some witnesses reported seeing dozens of orbs moving in complex formations across the night sky. Farmer Robert Sullivan near Salina reported the most spectacular encounter of this final wave. On the night of the 15th of July, 1954, Sullivan was awakened by his dogs barking frantically. Looking out his bedroom window, he saw what he later described as a city of lights hovering over his wheat fields. Sullivan counted at least 50 separate orbs arranged in a geometric pattern, roughly a quarter-mile across. The lights pulsed in synchronized patterns, creating waves of illumination that swept across the formation. Some orbs were stationary while others moved between fixed positions. This created an intricate light display that lasted nearly 2 hours. During the encounter, Sullivan's farm experienced a complete electrical blackout, despite no storms or other obvious causes. His battery-powered radio picked up strange signals that sounded like voices speaking in an unknown language. The signals faded as the orbs began to disperse. Individual lights broke away from the formation and disappeared in all directions. The Sullivan encounter marked the climax of the Kansas orb event. After that night, sightings declined rapidly and virtually ceased by the end of 1954. The sudden end was as mysterious as the original appearances. No obvious environmental changes or historical events coincided with the cessation of activity. Some researchers have speculated that the orbs were somehow connected to the agricultural cycle in Kansas. The peak years of 1952 to 1954 corresponded with a period of exceptional wheat harvests and ideal growing conditions. As farming methods became more mechanized and chemical fertilizers more common, the connection between the land and its mysterious visitors may have been severed. Others have suggested that the orbs were attracted to the electric fields generated by the era's technology. The early 1950s saw the widespread introduction of electrical equipment on farms. This included motors, generators, and radio communications. As this technology became more common and standardized, it may have lost whatever special properties attracted the events. The psychological impact of the orb sightings on rural Kansas communities was profound and lasting. Many witnesses reported that the encounters changed their perspective on science, religion, and humanity's place in the universe. Some became deeply interested in astronomy and physics. Others turned to spiritual or philosophical explanations for their experiences. Local churches struggled to address the theological implications of the sightings. Some ministers preached that the orbs were angels or divine messengers. Others warned they might be demonic manifestations. Most simply acknowledged that the events had occurred, but refrained from offering religious interpretations. The farming community itself was divided in its response. Practical farmers who had witnessed the events firsthand generally accepted that something unusual had occurred. They couldn't explain it, though. Others dismissed the reports as mass hysteria or misidentification of conventional aircraft and weather events. The economic impact of the orb sightings was minimal but noticeable. Tourism to central Kansas increased slightly as curiosity seekers visited the locations where encounters had been reported. Local businesses in Russell County saw a brief uptick in sales to visiting reporters and researchers. However, the effect was short-lived and faded as media attention moved on to other stories. Property values in affected areas showed little immediate change. However, some farmers later reported difficulty selling land where orb encounters had occurred. Superstitious buyers were concerned about haunted property. Skeptical purchasers worried about dealing with crazy sellers who claimed to have seen UFOs. Insurance companies briefly considered whether orb-related damage should be covered under standard farm policies. The burn mark at the Brennan farm raised questions about liability for unexplained events. However, since no significant property damage was reported beyond the single burn circle, the issue never required formal resolution. The Kansas orb encounters occurred during a period of significant social and technological change in rural America. The early 1950s marked the beginning of the mechanization revolution in agriculture. Traditional farming methods were giving way to industrial approaches that emphasized efficiency and chemical enhancement over natural processes. Some cultural anthropologists have suggested that the orb events represented a form of collective, unconscious response to these changes. The lights appeared at the moment when rural communities were losing their connection to the natural world and traditional ways of life. From this perspective, the orbs symbolized a final manifestation of the mystical relationship between humans and the land. Government response to the Kansas orb sightings was complex and sometimes contradictory. Military officials took the reports seriously enough to investigate personally, but their findings were never made public. Local law enforcement filed reports and collected evidence, but received little guidance from state or federal authorities on how to proceed. The Air Force's Project Blue Book investigated UFO reports nationwide. They classified the Kansas orbs as unidentified, but devoted relatively little attention to them compared to other cases. This may have been because the events didn't fit the typical UFO pattern of disc-shaped objects or obvious aircraft-like behavior. Scientific institutions showed varying levels of interest in the Kansas events. Major universities largely ignored the reports. Smaller regional schools conducted limited investigations. The lack of funding for unconventional research meant that most studies were undertaken by individual professors working on their own time and resources. The Kansas Historical Society began collecting witness accounts and physical evidence in 1955. They recognized that the orb sightings had become an important part of the state's folklore and cultural history. This archive remains one of the most comprehensive collections of documentation related to the event. Modern analysis of the Kansas orb sightings has been limited by the age of the evidence and the death of most witnesses. Computer modeling of weather patterns from the 1950s has failed to identify atmospheric conditions that could explain the events. Similarly, geological surveys have found no unusual mineral deposits or underground features that might account for the localized nature of the sightings. Advances in plasma physics have provided new theoretical frameworks for understanding ball lightning and similar events, but none adequately explain the size, duration, and behavior of the Kansas orbs. The objects described by witnesses were far larger and longer-lasting than any known form of atmospheric electricity. Contemporary UFO researchers continue to study the Kansas cases as examples of classic, unexplained events. The rural setting, multiple reliable witnesses, and physical evidence make them particularly compelling to investigators. However, the lack of photographic or video documentation limits the conclusions that can be drawn. The wheat still grows in Russell County, the sky still stretches endlessly above the plains, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars and the soil, possibilities continue to hover just beyond our understanding. If you've experienced anything similar to what these Kansas farmers witnessed, share your story in the comments below. Your account might help solve a mystery that has puzzled investigators for over 70 years. And if you enjoyed this exploration into the unexplained, subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge our understanding of the world around us.